There's nothing I hate more than nothing. Nothing keeps me up at night. I toss and turn over nothing. Nothing could cause a great big fight. What's the matter? What's wrong with you? Don't tell me nothing.
Hi, I am Dr. Kim Sage. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. Welcome to my channel. I wanted to talk today about compulsive caretaking as it relates to developing the fawn response for those of us raised by parents who probably fit more in the disorganized attachment category and possibly, parts of, for sure, the anxious attachment category. Now, when we think about the fawn response, it really is an adaptation to a threat and an attempt to, as Pete Walker says, to purchase safety by using servitude. And what I really mean by that is that if we're talking about disorganized attachment, for example, where the heart of that part of attachment is that the source of safety, the parent, the caregiver, is also the source of fear, alongside a more anxious type of attachment where we have a lack of consistency and a significant lack of predictability, alongside over-involvement in the parent's state of mind, which also occurs in disorganized attachment. And so when we're talking about the heart of this, what I want to get to is that the fawn response is really an attempt to please, to purchase safety at the expense of your own. Because a parent is in some sort of threat position. They are in fight or flight, they are critical, they are unsafe emotionally in some way, and fighting back is not an option. And so we develop the fawn response to sort of trying to get in front of it, as I talk about a lot, to rotating around their mood and mind, going back to what I just said about anxious styles and disorganized styles of being over-involved. Basically, we are overly involved, and we had to be because our parents' mood and mind, as all parents do, but it really does in these styles, determine the temperature in the home. And we learn that we can get our needs met by paying an excessive amount of attention to making sure the parent is okay. As I talked about earlier in the week, I guess last week, enmeshment and parentification, these are really about melding into the parent's world to get your needs met. And so that really is what happens, is that this fawn response develops, and we take this into our adult lives, and it becomes the way we deal with all relationships, right? We have this attachment pattern, and then we have that we've been responding to in childhood, and then we have our parents, their body, their mood, their mind as it played out in their own nervous system. And so what we're really talking about here is a way to kind of get our nervous system regulated to calm and soothe the temperature inside of us when the parent's elevating, or when they're being neglectful or shutting us out or collapsing or being wounding. We're trying to manage our own bodies. And the fastest way to do that for many of us, the safest way, the quickest way, the most guaranteed way, was to fawn, was to please and appease that parent or parents or the environment. And so we take this and it becomes the template for our adult lives. So what else does fawning look like? It can look like, as you grow up, an inability to say no, to set boundaries, to even know what your own needs are, because you have compulsively learned that it needs to always be about everyone else first before you can be okay. And when you make it about them, you're calming your own system and you're numbing your own pain, right? If I'm focused on you, then I don't have to pay attention to all of the emptiness, the wounds, the longings, the fears, the hypervigilance in my own body, because I'm trying to regulate that by compulsively caretaking you. It can certainly look like over-apologizing, never saying no, never really having an opinion that seems anywhere near controversial, trying to sort of always be there for others and rescue them. I would say a large majority of those in the helping professions probably have had to have a fawning response. And I would say a high tolerance. One of the things about therapists is that we are able to sit with you and listen to your story and your pain because most of us already know some form of pain, and we were trained to do that in some way also with a parent. And that can be actually a super skill, I believe. If you're good about working on your own boundaries and getting support, to be able to sit with someone in their darkest, most difficult moments in life, or just their deepest reflections on their goals, their childhood, that to me is beautiful. It does come at a cost, but I also think that in many regards, it's a beautiful skill to have. If it's your job, of course, but if you spend your whole life doing that and it's not your job, you're often sacrificing yourself in the process. And so we might, change our preferences, our needs. We might minimize our own physical pain. And I would argue that many of us have chronic illnesses because we have stuffed and repressed all of the feelings we have in the sake and service of the other, of the parent, and then of the partner, of the children. These are often the kind of parents who will, and there's varying degrees of this, but sacrifice everything for their children, for their partners, and oftentimes it will take a life-threatening illness or something significant to really shine the light on how little attention we have paid to ourselves. And so what I want you to really start to think about in this video was, I was like, okay, how do I make these videos meaningful, is to challenge how you show up in the world if you are a compulsive caretaker, if you were raised in a more anxious and or disorganized or mixed type of environment where you had to always be on guard for the mind and mood of a parent, and how that is showing up in your life today. And how often do you actually say no? When do you say yes when you'd like to say no? And how do you even know what your boundaries are? What is your identity? Who are you? What are your values? What are your morals? I know that you don't care sometimes about where we go to dinner, but maybe you've learned not to care. And if you let yourself really tap into it, you might prefer this restaurant over that one. To learn to cultivate that inner voice that doesn't just start with, what does everyone else need? That is so important. And we'd also, like I always say, I want to honor this beautiful, compassionate, caregiving part of who you are. We just don't want it to be all of who you are. It's not selfish to talk about your childhood in therapy. It's not selfish to not want to do everything your kids want and to play every single game and to be at every single match. Most of us who didn't have parents present we can overdo those things for our kids, where we deny them the ability to learn autonomy. I know for me, as I've talked about in a lot of videos, in my home, there were no real boundaries because it was just, everything was about anger or yelling, and I didn't want to do that. So I would take too much and then be resentful. Like, why aren't you doing your chores? It's like, well, because you didn't set a clear boundary about that. And so that was on me to cultivate. How could I expect them to know and read my mind if I didn't make it clear? But in my mind, and this also goes back to, is because we had these parents, we often don't have a realistic view of who we are. We're either just like them or nothing like them. And that can be an unhealthy dynamic too, as we don't learn to look at, well, what would a healthy boundary look like? I know in my childhood I had no voice, so I want to give my kids a lot of voice, but what if they don't necessarily need complete voice about everything? And I would argue that they don't. There needs to be some structure in some ways as we foster and help develop who they're going to be. So let's talk about what you can do to be more mindful of healing this. The first thing is to understand that you really are trying to purchase safety in your body. That when your first impulse and moment in time says, what is happening right now? What does everyone need? What do I have to do right now? To learn to slow down, to learn to pause, to recognize that you're trying to offload that anxiety, that need to read everybody, that discomfort in your body, and to just learn to pause and to slow down before you say or do the next thing. That is the most important thing to me, is that you understand there was a biological purpose being served by your fawning behavior, and that something has to shift for that to change. The next thing what you really want to work on is looking at, in terms of your healing, that being paused, but that pausing, the goal of that is to get you grounded firmly in the present, as opposed to you automatically, like a robot, going into that responsiveness and or, God forbid, feeling triggered in an emotional flashback state. How dare you set a boundary? You're so selfish. Many difficult parents will tell their children, you're too needy, you're selfish, through their whole lives, even as children, and certainly into their adult lives. And so in your mind, you've equated selfishness with even having needs. And that applies to everything, like I'm saying, including your own just self-care. And that's why I think we often have a lot of chronic illness, because we've lived in that fight or flight. We've tried to shut it down with fawning or even freezing, and we've kind of encapsulated all that pain and grief inside. And over time, that process in our DNA and our cells through toxic stress, it truly becomes toxic inside every organ of our body for many of us. So the first thing is that. The next thing is to really start to understand that you get to be present in relationships. You know, it's reciprocity we're seeking. And so that includes, in safe little doses, self-disclosure, bringing yourself into relationship. You're often so good at asking the questions and being a listener that when it comes to you, you don't want to share, you don't know how to share. And I would argue, even more than that, you don't believe it's safe to share. And so you shut that down. And with certain types of people, let's say those who are unaware, certainly narcissists, they're going to love that. What a great gift to give a narcissist, to make everything about them, for you to take care of everything and to rotate around them, and then for you not to see it because that is what you grew up with, right, in some form. So pausing, becoming more present, learning to talk and bring yourself in safe little doses more and more into relationship. I can be so guarded, especially being a psychologist and living in a small town, that when I do open up, I can have these like shame spirals afterwards where I think, oh my God, I can't believe I just said that. Because back in the day, 10, 15 years ago, I did the opposite, was like trauma dump, always trying to justify and explain why I was raising 4 children alone, because I had so much shame about it, because it was from my childhood. I didn't want to be a single mother, right? And so I would overtell the story about how did I end up with full custody of 4 children from the ages of 1 to 9, 1 to 8, whatever it was. And so it's been a long time now. And that didn't feel good either. And so then I just shut that down and stopped doing that, and then didn't share anything. So that shame, though, that we feel for being ourselves, if we're not fawning, we can feel shame for just existing, just being who we are. And that doesn't feel good either. And so you want to learn to, what Pete Walker talks about, I should say, is tapping in more to that fight part of yourself, to the self-advocacy, to speaking up for yourself, to setting boundaries, right? There's an energy, there's a momentum in fight. And so it's okay to tap into that. I know for many of us, fight literally meant, conflict, danger. So I'm not going to do that in childhood. So just going to be a acquiescer to everything. Yes, be a yes man. Okay, no problem. It's fine. There's that Edie Brickell song, there's nothing I hate more than nothing. Nothing keeps me up at night. And that's that thing. If your partner is saying what's wrong and you're saying nothing, or you're the one hearing that, trust me, 9 times out of 10, there's a whole lot of something going on. But we don't even always know it. We're so used to having no needs and nothing, and to only feeling filled when you have your needs met, that we don't even know where to begin. Certainly looking at things like building healthier relationships, like I'm talking about, where you show up and you also expect reciprocity. Trying to focus on development of identity and self. Who are you? What are your dreams? What are your goals? What if you drew yourself as a person, what would you say are the things that you value, and what are the beliefs, and what are your hopes and longings for the world? And then working on making that belief about yourself in a reality. If you have always longed to be someone who gives back, but you don't do any volunteering, well, why is that? Maybe right now you're in a season of life where you just can't do it from a time perspective, but maybe you could in the future. So what would that look like? So looking at things like, how do I value myself? Who am I? That's really, really important. And then learning to, as you're becoming more aware and more present in the moment, to also learn to validate and honor your own emotional expressions. For so many of us, we learn to stuff those feelings. Like I said, we shame them. And so developing what I talked about so much in my course on your inner parent. It's not just your inner child, it's how we talk to the inner child, and saying, you know what? It's okay that you shared that much at that lunch or whatever, and that was you being your full real self and not trying to present as someone else. I'm proud of you. You don't need to feel shame for that. I know that was hard for you. Things like that where you learn to cultivate a love and compassion and a voice inside. You can't just wake up and love yourself. I don't believe that's possible. But when you set up your life in a way that says, my feelings matter, my thoughts matter, my beliefs matter, and here's how I know, because these are the things I say yes or no to, or this is what I let in my life, and this is what I don't. All of that will help you begin to combat that fawn where your automatic go-to is about what do I need to be for other people, and more about, or at least as much about, what do I want to be for myself. So I know it's a hard thing to do. That compulsive caretaking as a result of fawning, it's just become so automatic that we don't even know that we're doing it so much of the time. And so maybe you go back and you reflect on interactions and say, oh, where was I in that interaction? Where's the evidence that I was also showing up? Did I say what I wanted? Did I share what I believed? And we don't have to do that at every single interaction, at every moment, all of the time. There are some times when it's just fine to just not say anything. But if more often than not, your go-to is what does everyone else need at the expense of yourself, then you've definitely met that criteria, most likely for being a fawner, a pleaser, a people pleaser, a compulsive caretaker. And I promise you that you are having some kind of symptoms and side effects in your mental and physical health and relationships. There's just no way that you're not. So I hope this video was helpful. I'd love to hear your thoughts about fawning and what you find helpful, and I will look forward to seeing you next week. Please stay safe and well, and if you are new here, please consider subscribing. I would love for you to do that, and check out my links down below. I have some more information on my courses and what you might find helpful. If this topic today was, one that rang true for you, I've been there. I have walked that path. And I've worked with hundreds of people who have done the same damn thing. And so it has become something that I am just very, very passionate about, and frankly, very grateful to be able to share and talk about. So I appreciate you so much. Thank you for being here. I'll see you next week. Stay safe. Take care. Bye-bye.